Hi everyone, welcome to yet another month of September, where we're at the end of this glorious month that hopefully has been safe and joyful for many of you. Singi and I were excited to bring this conversation back again. We thought that the conversation we had in August was quite fun, and we got a lot of great responses. So we thought we'll keep doing this as long as you're interested in learning more about our journey and hearing some of our thoughts. So this month, we're flipping the script. So I will be asking the questions, and Sangi will be sharing some of her thoughts. For many of you who may not know, every month we write a newsletter straight from our desk and our hearts, where we talk about what work we're doing, but also some of the thoughts that we have. And this month in September, Sangi has written an incredible note and has shared some really great updates as well. So Sangi, welcome in the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So tell me, like, before we talk about your note, which I'm so excited to talk about on perspectives, I just want to hear what was the big highlight for you in September?
Yeah, September was quite interesting. I think so that was the month that I decided to move to Seoul for a whole month. I moved into one of my close friends' apartments. She had an empty room to rent it out for me. And since being back in Korea, I've been living with my parents in a very small town that I grew up in as a child. So I lived where I am right now. Actually, I just came back for the Full Moon Festival to spend it with my family. About, I think, 3 months without interacting with anyone of my age in person. Like a lot of my socializing and everything were through virtual setting, on a virtual setting. And so I think I really craved interacting with people of my age for quite some time. So that was one of the motivation for me to move to Seoul, to be close to some of my friends who are working in Seoul, and also to live in a city that's just really busy and that's just like a lot happening all the time. So just reflecting back to the month, I feel like just living with 3 other friends in the same room, a same house. We have like all our own rooms, was just like an experience in itself. And I don't think I did much more stuff that was different from like what I did in August, for instance, but I think just reliving what my life was like in college was how I literally was feeling the whole month in September, for sure. Yeah.
And I think some of what you share, and I'm going to kind of segue us into the note you've written, which is titled "On Perspectives," and and part of this note and the inspiration came as part of a conversation you're having with a friend.
Yeah.
Is this part of the friend group or the circle that you're
Yeah.
able to build, and how did this conversation come about for you?
So it's actually funny because it's literally the friend that invited me to live with her. So both of us don't sleep until very late. So I usually end my work depending on like what days, right? Like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. That's when I like wrap up, and so does she. And most of the time when she comes back from her office, we just like have a late dinner together. And generally like after like an hour or two together, we kind of go into each other's room, and we just spend it on our own. And most of the time I spend my night reading. So that night, I was up until like 3 a.m. because I just couldn't fall asleep. And then I was reading my book. And I came out to go to the bathroom and get a glass of water. And I saw her sitting in the living room and reading. And generally, she tries to go to bed early because she has to go to office in the morning. And I was like, oh, why are you up? And she's like, oh, I started reading this fiction and I can't stop. And she's like, why are you up? And I was like, oh, I'm reading this nonfiction and I can't stop. And we were both really invested into this, like, each other's books and like our own books. And we were just like talking about the context and what attracted us to keep reading. And that's when I realized most of my libraries the past few years were like, I think 90% 98% nonfiction, and her library on the other hand were like 100% fiction. She like explicitly said like, I'm not very interested in learning about day-to-day lives. Like I know I live that. Like I want to just be taken outside my daily life to be in a in the whole new universe with like a whole different perspectives and ways of life. Whereas I think I was finding it initially comforting to read something that I can relate to, but also been more attracted more recently to authors who just see the same thing so differently from how I see it. And weird comfort that I was getting from that, or like pleasure that I was getting from such experience was like what we talked about. And it was like very different context between me and my friend, but we both were craving kind of the same sense of like wanting to be shattered, like wanting to have our perspective entirely shattered. And so that's what inspired me to write this note.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because a big part of that shattering process is it feels like it's the unlearning part, right? You're learning to kind of unlearn what maybe from your childhood or from certain perspective, and you're changing that perspective. And as a team leader at Bean Voyage, how are you kind of instilling that as part of our team culture at Bean Voyage?
A really good question. And I thinking about that question, I feel like maybe it's not something that I instill within the organization. I feel like that's something that all of us somewhat embodies in our daily life. I can see I know you're a great advocate of like unlearning and always wanting to question your own pre-built judgment or opinions with like new sets of opinions. And I can say the same about Adri and Fernanda. And I feel like it just happened to be that we maybe are quite alike, that we came together as a group to work on an passion project. It started off as like something that we are all very just passionate about, and like now we are doing it as a career, right? And maybe like just to answer that question, I don't think I had to do honestly anything to instill that. I just feel like maybe there were a few structural elements that all of us kind of like built it together so that we can continue that unlearning process as an organization and as a group of leaders and group of thinkers and actors. But I can't, like looking back, I can't think of like a single thing that I alone did single-handedly to instill any of it. I think we were all quite passionate about that. Yeah.
And has there been challenges? Have you faced challenges where, because part of what you're talking about has to do with destroying hierarchies, right? Like when we talk about, our team, we're a fairly small team, and we like to think, and we don't actually have much hierarchy. And to the best of our abilities, we don't, I think. Right. But at the same time, traditional organizations have hierarchies, and it's quite difficult to kind of shatter those norms and kind of things that are set up in an organization. Right. Have you seen that challenge, and whether it's at Bean Voyage or other organizations, and if so, how is that process of shattering those boundaries that are sometimes very prevalent, where just one perspective is the right perspective and everything else is not important?
Right. I think that's a really great point, because I think having this attitude about unlearning doesn't mean it's an easy process for everyone, right? Like it's one thing to have that perspective of like, okay, like I'm ready to like shatter my learn anything at any point, but that unlearning process in itself can be actually very painful, even if you're open to it, because it's quite a lot of thinking process and reflection that you will have to do in order for you to let go of like what you're so comfortable with, to just embody something that's completely foreign to you. Maybe you grew up in an environment or culture that hierarchy was a norm, and even if you know that you wanted to unlearn that, maybe you never had been in a setting where you can just throw that away and adopt a whole new way of working, right? And I think as you're talking about our organization, I think we'd like to see it as more circular rather than like hierarchical, right? Like we have leaders for different projects, and regardless of your position, you are leading one of the projects that we are facilitating and organizing as an organization. And once you become the leader, maybe there is a facilitator for that meeting or the project, but the leader will be the one that will be coming up with the OKRs, like the objectives and stuff, and everybody else, regardless of how long they've been with the organization, will have to follow the lead. So I think one thing that I've seen all of us, I think struggle initially is because some of us have come from, I think, more hierarchical organization. I think asking questions of like simple why should I do it, wasn't necessarily something that everybody just did it. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't I think culturally as well, it might, in some people's context, I think that would come across as like, oh, you are not respecting the speaker by asking the why. Whereas for some of us, I think it was like, you have to ask the why for you to show respect and you actually care, because you want to know the logic behind it, to actually believe in it and actually act it out the way the proposer may have thought it out to be. So I think there were a little bit of like friction there in terms of like communication and like the way we go about it. But at the same time, knowing, I think the important part was that all of our attitude, like coming into this organization was that, okay, like whatever the challenge, like whatever challenges that we face, we are ready to unlearn it. And we are ready, like we are committed to go through that process, even if it's challenging and painful, to actually unlearn our old habits, to become better colleagues for the other person, better teammate for the other person. So for me personally as well, I think it was quite challenging. Every time we welcome new teammate, I think there's always like a process of like, okay, like we are all learning how to better work with this person and better support this person, so that they're able to also achieve their goals within the organization. And I'm sure like you did go through that, and I'm pretty sure Fernanda and Adriana have gone through it, and maybe all of us are still going through it as quite a young organization, and like always new projects coming in and new partners coming in. But I think personally, I think what really matters is the attitude. And I think something that also like I wanted to share, something that like you've introduced to our organization was a user guide that has been really helping all of us a lot. Is that so when you join Bin Voyage as a staff, you sign, obviously you sign the contract and everything, but you also write a user guide so that everybody else gets to know you better. So these user guides include, how do you want to receive feedback? What's your preferred way of communicating? And so like, you kind of like give everybody else the perspective of like what you like or what you're good at as a team worker, as a colleague, and everybody else, it's everybody else's job then to learn more about you through that user guide. I think that has definitely minimized the amount of time that we spend trying to figure out how to best work in a group. So I'm really grateful that you've introduced that to our team, and yeah, it's been quite incredible.
Oh yeah, and it's something that I think was a really good best practice that I learned about, and I think it's been an interesting best practice for us. And I think as we grow as a team, it's going to be important for us to instill that. I want to talk a bit more about the idea of perspective change, going from the asking of the why and this intense debate that we have, which, by the way, during our 2-hour sessions, if you join in, you'll see that in person, and how intense we get about that. But it's because those 2 hours are the most important 2 hours of our whole week, usually, right? Because that's when we decide the next kind of game plan, usually. So there is that element of the asking of the why. What's the role that listening plays in the changing of perspectives? And what role do you think listening plays in some of that shattering that also happens?
Yeah, a great question. I feel like everything starts with listening, right? You might, because if you're not listening per se to what your teammate has to say or your partner has to say, I feel like there would never really be a moment for you to even be shattered, your perspective to be even shattered, because you're going to be comfortable in your own wall that you put up, whether it's a glass wall or a thick brick wall that's visible to everybody else. Like I think we all have some sort of wall that we put up against who we are as an identity, like as a person, or opinions that we form, or cultural elements that we grew up with. And I think a lot of the times, once those walls get kind of like invaded or attacked per se, to kind of like use an equivalent of a word for shatter, I think that's when people become defensive, because that's like that's what you want to protect. But I think being defensive is something that I personally am really working hard to like unlearn, because I think that's something that everybody as an instinct has it, right? Like we want to make sure that what we grew up with or what we think is true gets protected. And you defend, and it comes out as a defensive reaction, and oftentimes leads to unproductive communication. And I think that's when once you become defensive, that means you're not listening. So I think listening plays a role, like a really important role for you to actually not put up that wall, and maybe just like open that door a little bit. Like it's like an act of like opening that, like, or making a door into the wall that you built, and making sure that someone else can come in and just tell you what their life has been like, or what their perspective has been like. And yeah, I really think that listening is just like that act of putting the door there, and it's your decision then to decide, okay, like your perspective convinced me to actually build stronger wall. Maybe some people choose to do that. Some people may say like, oh, actually, like you changed my perspective entirely, and I'm gonna like shatter all of it and like rebuild my wall. Like inform, like wall with your opinion, taken kind of into consideration in it. So yeah, I guess like. Yeah, I feel like it's just like a first step towards it. And obviously I think it's whatever comes after it will be like dependent on the listener as well.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because for me, that has been one of the things I've had to learn a lot about. And I think a big part of that has been because I've worked and learned with you. A lot of that has been learning to listen from you. And especially when we spend quite a lot of time, and not as much this year, but in the previous years, in communities where we're sitting down and literally just listening. And it's, we go in for 4 hours, we end up staying for 8. And that's usually like the kind of work that we're in, where it's a lot of listening, because even the ideas that we have for what might work in terms of our training program, in terms of our model, we have one perspective. And to your point, it gets shattered completely when we spend 8 hours with one family, and they tell us a very different angle to the story, to the problem, and their perspective and how they look at it and what they think should happen. And it's so often the case that we come out of that 8-hour listening session and we're just, shattered. Whatever ideas we had is shattered. Sometimes that makes us a bit more fragile, because oftentimes it means that we just have to like quickly change. And that's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, that's, I think, the most meaningful thing for us to do. Last question here, like, has there been an instance, or when was the last time you felt like your perspective was challenged? And is there something that you'd like to share with the rest of us?
That's a really good question, because I feel like that's on a daily basis. So I studied writing more recently in Korean, and I think a lot of it has been like my attempt to record pieces of memories that my family holds about our family, like, our family as a whole, and also like I think mostly about my grandmother, and how she remembers her childhood, and how that's also changed over time, because I've been hearing the same stories over the past few years. Like she literally repeated multiple stories, and how it evolves as well, like, right, like how people tell their stories also change. So I've been trying to like record that as live as possible as a practice, since I'm spending quite some time with my family here, and it's a lot easier for me to call up my grandma once a day when it's not international calls. How you look at like the same figure as grandma can also be very different. And maybe another example would be like how we talk about coffee, how we talk about people in our life, how we remember certain memories. Even if my sister, she was reading my writing yesterday, and she said like, I don't remember any of this, and I clearly remember all of them. And she actually comes into, like, she is part of the story. So she actually was like, how do you remember this? And like we remember like the same event. We've experienced the same event, but we remember very different things from the same event. So I thought that was also very fascinating because she kept saying like, wow, like this is kind of crazy. Like, and her sets of experience was also like what I had completely forgotten about. So, yeah, it might just be like different memories, but I think that also comes from like our perspective of like where we are when we're going through that experience. And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
It does in very kind of, I guess, in an emotional setting and not necessarily maybe, oh, I had this idea or this perspective that you traditionally consider, but actually in a very a much more deeper sense, which I very much appreciate. And I guess as we wrap things up and be mindful of the time of all of our wonderful friends and family who are joining us for this video, I guess one really short question I have is, in September, you wrote something about the 6-word memoir, and your 6-word memoir was really powerful. Was wondering if you feel comfortable sharing that, because I thought that was very well written as well.
Oh, thank you. Let me pull that up because I want to make sure that there are 6 words, because if I say it now, it might actually, if written out differently, it might not be 6 words. Yeah, but thanks. I think that activity definitely was amazing. So Abby led this activity for the team to write 6-word memoir for each of us as a way to get to know each other better and check in. And we all had very different 6 words, which also was incredible. That's also, I think, different perspective, like what matters a lot to our life at that moment, right? Because I think it's also evolving. If we do it even like next month, it might actually be different for each and one of us. So my 6-word memoir that I shared in September with the team was imagining what I'll be happy with if I were lying on a deathbed. I wrote, loved wholeheartedly, shared generously, and lived fully. Yeah, I guess I chose these words because that's what I have been struggling with. I think especially when it comes to loving wholeheartedly, I know there were many times that I'm not only talking about romantic love, but about like, general active loving and caring. And I think there were times that I compromised the act because I was so preoccupied with like the plan for the future, or, I had to do certain things and I had to, I didn't have, in my words, I said, I didn't have time to spend, on this act of caring or act of loving, even with my parents and family at times, right? Like I do compromise spending time with them because I'm like, oh, I need to be like writing this XYZ for another project rather than spending 30 minutes a day with them or calling them every day for 30 minutes to check in. I'm like, oh, I need to be working on another project. I'm too busy, I think was what I always used. And that's something that I've been reflecting a lot on ever since coming back, of like, why did I wait until now to spend so much time with them? Like, it could even be just calling them up every day for 20 minutes, 30 minutes right before dinner. We spend a lot of time on Instagram or Facebook or any other platforms. Why do we not have that minutes to even just like check in? And I think also sharing and living fully was in a similar context of like, I didn't think at the point that I was actively embodying this verbs. So like if you notice, they're like verbs and acts rather than nouns. And I think that's because I've been more reflecting on like, what am I doing with my being and with my existence? And like that activity really gave me that opportunity to reflect more of like what I should be doing more. Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful, and I know that our team agreed as well. And thank you for sharing with everyone, and for opening up and for willing to be vulnerable about some of these ideas and thoughts. I think it opens up a different perspective, if I may say so, into the person who's the leader of the organization. So it's so great to have this conversation. I know we have a lot of these conversations almost on on a daily basis, but I don't think we actually get to sit down and reflect just on some of the ideas and thoughts for 15, 20 minutes. So very much appreciate this. I personally do, and I hope everyone who's able to watch it also does. Well, thank you so much, Sandeep, for joining us, and it's been such an honor to have this chat, and I hope we can do many more of these over the next few months, and thank you for writing such a beautiful.
And thank you. And for those of you who don't know, Abhi will be traveling to Costa Rica tomorrow, actually. So please wish him luck and safe trip. And next time we chat, he'll be connecting from Costa Rica.
Yay. Woo. We're psyched.
Yeah.
Excited. Take care, everyone. We'll talk again next month. And if you haven't already, do subscribe to our newsletter so that you can get our monthly updates and some of these videos on a regular basis. Have a wonderful October, and we hope to see you all in a month's time.
Bye.
Bye.